With so many great dungeon games, we're going to take a look at Dungeon Saga and see if it can live up or surpass any of the games out there now. This game is by Mantic Games, so let's go to the table and take a look. So to start, I'm not going to be able to go over all the rules here, but I'm going to give you a brief overview of everything. Each character comes with a card. They have a movement value of 6, which is 6 spaces, how many dice they'll roll in combat, their armor, which we'll explain a little bit later, and then a feat, a main feat that they can only use once per game, and it takes up both their actions. Up on top of the card is how many wounds they can take. If you notice, some of these are in silver and then one's in red. Once these are all filled and the red is only showing, then they are reduced in their combat value. And once all are shown, they are considered knocked out and out of the game. In some games, there are actually losing conditions. Now here we have a piece of the board, and I'm going to show you how movement works. Movement, of course, is moved by spaces, and you can move diagonally as well as forward. You cannot move where there is a diagonal, where there is no following space, and there is an empty space. You have to be able to move diagonally and have spaces around you. Your arc is from each square from the side to the front 3, and your behind arc is your back 3. Now when moving, especially into an enemy's area, you cannot go past an enemy because once in their front arc, you are considered engaged in combat. And how does combat work? Very simply. Now as when we looked at the dwarfs' statistics, they get 4 combat dice to be in the front arc. But the necromancer, and this game has an overlord, which we'll explain very shortly, has an actual detail of all the creatures that are in the game. They have a movement of 4, they have 2 combat dice, and 2 defense dice. On the right here, you can see a chart that shows how many hits an enemy can take and what the effects are when they get hit. So how do we achieve these hits? Let's take a look. Now the dwarf has a combat dice of 4, and we just had moved him prior into the arc of the skeleton warrior, who has a combat dice of 2. What happens is the dwarf rolls. Now because his defense is 2, anything from 2 and underneath is considered a feeble hit and removed from the board. The skeleton has 2 dice. They are rolled. Now what happens is the dice are now aligned up from the highest to the lowest, and then the skeletons or defender or overlord is also lined up from the highest to the lowest. In this case there are 2 hits. Now 2 hits on a skeleton warrior means replace model with bone pile counter. If we were able to hit him with 3, he would be destroyed and removed from the game. So what does that mean as far as bone piles? Let's take a look. So here we have our tile, and we had just resolved the hit. Now what happens is when it's being replaced by a bone pile is put there. Now throughout the different scenarios and quests and so forth that come with this game, there may be bone piles already on the board. And the necromancer, or the overlord, has the ability to raise those depending on the scenario and how many command points. But we'll get to that in a little bit. Now, because it was reduced to bones, so let's say that the overlord decided to raise the skeleton here. What happens now is that the dwarf would get what is called a free action. Okay? And it's a free swing, basically, excuse me. They would roll their combat dice, and of course, again, as we see, the skeleton would roll its defense dice. We'd take and put our dice in order, as you can see here, and do the same for the skeleton, with the highest to the lowest. And as you can see, we've got 3 hits here. Now on the on the chart it said remove and destroy model, which means that this bone pile goes away because it was actually risen. You cannot go up to a bone pile and destroy it or attack it. It cannot be done anything until it raises up. Now let's say that our skeleton warrior was engaged with the dwarf. But now let's say the dwarf was needed elsewhere and needed to back away. Well, it cannot back away if there is another enemy, a friendly unit, or a barrel or a piece of furniture in the way. It can only move if there is a free space and nothing blocking the spaces adjacent. But in attempts to move away, the skeleton would get a free attack. And in this case, they would roll their dice, again aligning from the highest to the lowest. And because the dwarf has a armor of 4, anything below a 4 would be considered a feeble hit and left. And of course, our hero would get to roll and then again match up the dice. And of course, defend against the hit. Now, let's say, for instance, that the skeleton had attacked the dwarf and rolled 2 6s. Now, if our hero here only rolled 4s, a 2 and a 1, of course, in defense, this means that there are 2 hits. And 2 hits does not mean that we wound Rorden with 2 wounds onto his card. At any time, no matter how many hits, the heroes can only take 1 hit. And that also goes for the heroes of the enemy, or the Overlord. None of them can take more than 1 hit. So even if the heroes were able to initiate more than 1 hit per figure, they could not do more than 1 damage upon the hero of the Overlord, or the evil bosses as we call them. Now shooting is a whole different story. As you can see, we have our elf ranger here. In close combat, they would get 3 dice. In shooting phase, they get 4 dice, and it's long range. There are long range and short range abilities. So let's take a look at how that works on the same tile with the same skeleton. Now here we have the archer who sees the skeleton. There is a ruler that comes with the game, and as you can see, this is a long range ruler. As long as it is within range and nothing blocking it, we can fire at the skeleton and possibly destroy the skeleton. Now, if this situation arises, you cannot shoot through a friendly model, nor can you shoot through an enemy model. Now, if the enemy model, if the model was here, as long as we can draw a direct line from any corner without any blockage, you can shoot at it. As far as furniture is concerned, you can shoot through past the table because you're actually shooting over it. But you cannot shoot over a bookcase at any time, as that is considered blocking of line of sight. And as long as you have line of sight and you can make a direct line in any direction, you can hit the unit. Now let's talk about the different phases that you can have, and let's put our dwarf back on here and talk about the different phases that we can have with the different actions that each character has. You have to move first before you can perform any other action, or you can just do an action and not move. You cannot do an action and then move. Let's say, for instance, we had a treasure chest in front of us and we wanted to get over to that skeleton. Well, we want to open this, but if we open it, we cannot move and get into the front arc of the skeleton. We would have to move and then perform an action. Or, if we do an action, we cannot move. If we wanted to fight a skeleton and then move over to the treasure chest, you cannot fight and then move. So you have to be very deliberate. And also, there are special feats on each and every card. If you were to do this, this would take up both your actions and is only used once per game. Another thing is if we were able to attack a skeleton from behind its front arc, meaning the 3 spaces behind, what would happen is the skeleton would get a negative modifier to its combat dice, which can never go below 2. You always have to be able to at least roll 2 dice, and that's for every figure. If there were a bunch of modifiers where we had behind arc and support here to attack our dear friend the dwarf, as we're going to take a look right here, they can never go below 2 dice. And there are negative modifiers for having somebody in each arc. And if you have something where it would go below 2 dice, you would take it off their armor. So the dwarf's armor would, per se, would be able to roll 2 dice in defense, but only have an armor of 3. Now let's talk about the necromancer. The necromancer comes with spells predetermined, and also a feat or a focus feat. But as you can see here, we have a spell here. This is considered a minor spell, and it also notates what the range is for the spell. And over here it says you do not need line of sight. There are spells that do not need line of sight, and there are spells that need line of sight, and they have to have a sight and will give you the range. There are major and minor spells. When you cast a minor spell, it gets termed or tapped, depending on which you want to use, 90 degrees. Major spells get tapped 180 degrees. And at the end of your turn in the cleanup phase, what happens is you get to turn those spells 90 degrees back. So if you use a minor spell, it'll be ready for the next turn, where a major spell you can use only every other turn. The Overlord controls the evil side. The Overlord is given 3 cards at the beginning of the game, and after every turn is allowed to draw 1 card. Now these cards can do a different variance of things. You can play an interrupt on the hero's turn, so that means that would give you 1 command action. Each scenario or quest comes with a number of how many models that you can use, how many command cards you can have in your deck, as well as how many commands you can give the army. Most have 2 commands. So during a hero's turn, you can use this interrupt and do a complete command, which means that you can move this guy and possibly attack on their turn, basically causing bedlam into the plans of the heroes. Now, say it's your turn and you get only 2 commands. You can do a number of different things. You can A, raise a skeleton onto a pile of bones, which is considered 1 activation, and that's it. They cannot do anything else. You can give a command to any one of your troops and either have them move and attack, or just move, or just attack, depending on range and where you are in the front arc of the heroes. There are also cards in your deck that will give you extra commands. Some give you 2 commands, some give you 3 commands. You cannot activate any figure twice within the same turn. Basically, the deck also, as well, the Overlord deck is considered a timer. So at the end of each turn, no matter how many cards they use, say they use an interrupt and a command card during their turn and an interrupt during the hero's turn, they are only allowed to draw 1 card at any time. When that deck runs out, most of the scenarios say that's the end of the game and the Overlord wins. So you can't sit there and muddle around. You have to get going and fight away. And that is a basic overview of Dungeon Saga. Now, you don't just have skeletons and such. You have large figures, such as the zombie trolls. You have undead dwarves. And none of these come painted, by the way. I painted all these. And the game comes with a number of bosses, such as the Undead Dwarf King, the Spirit Ghost, or Banshee, and of course, the main villain of the whole story, which is the Necromancer himself. This all comes in the game and plays a big part. The game comes with a very great quest book that is used by the Overlord. And there are a number of different adventures, and you could play a whole campaign through. And it gives everything the Overlord needs and wants, and it's very well written and a fantastic story as well. The rules are nice and easy, and they come with a reference sheet, which is perfect, as well as a quick start guide to walk you through your first couple of adventures. With that, this covers everything that pretty much you would need to get going with Dungeon Saga. So let's go up top and get my thoughts. If any of you have seen Board Game Breakfast and seen what I thought about the miniatures, which I really didn't comment on this video because I think it's pretty much self-explanatory. If you go to Board Game Breakfast 111, you can hear my thoughts during my segment about what I think about the miniatures. And with that said, I have to say this is a very good game. It kind of has an identity crisis. It doesn't know what it wants to be. It wants to be Descent, and yet it wants to be Hero Quest / Warhammer Quest, and then it kind of wants to be a role-playing game as well in some ways. And with the Adventurer Companion, which I'll be actually doing a review on at some point, either this week or next week, we're going to see if that adds and changes this game any. But just talking about this box set, you get plenty of stuff in it. It's very well priced. My problem seems to be with the miniatures. They could have been a little bit better. But when we started playing this, and the kids and I, who really aren't big dungeon crawl kids, they really weren't into it. They were very into this game. They were soaked in by the story, they were soaked in by the character development, and they really liked the way this game kind of moved along and played along. And one of the things that I really thought was kind of neat is that the way this comes together, it comes in a book form. So you can actually put this on your shelf, and the coming expansions will all make like a giant story in a bookcase. So I thought that was really neat. So even though I didn't think too highly of the miniatures, the game itself was something that I got very engaged in and that we have played a few times, and each time the experience has been even better. There's a lot of rules that I didn't even cover in here as far as opening furniture, items, some of the doors and stuff like that, you know, how you break a door with magic or with strength. There's a lot of little nuances that go into this game that makes it very much fun. But you can see where they take from different games and they kind of cram it all into this one game. Where being an experienced dungeon crawler, because my love and my passion is dungeon crawls, I was, oh, well, I seen this. All you're doing is taking this. Does this game make me want to replace my Descent? Does this game make me want to not play Warhammer Quest anymore? Well, no, it doesn't make me want to take away from that. It makes me want to have more of this, to see where this goes and see how it develops. So if I had to rate this game and put into words what I think it is, I think it's a good, strong 7 out of 10. And I really think it's worth getting. Again, the issue with the models, take a look at Board Game Breakfast and you can see what my thoughts are on it. But if I'm just judging the game itself, this is a very strong dungeon crawl. And if you like dungeon crawls, you are really going to enjoy this game. It's fun. You're going to want to play it again. And you're going to want to play the whole campaign because it has a very good and very deep story. So that's it for this time. Be sure to join me for my next review, which will be The Adventurer's Companion for Dungeon Saga. So until next time, I'm Rob Orn. We'll see you soon.